the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer, someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer, baseball in the summer.
Welcome to the Brockvmac Legendary Rivals podcast. We're doing a Badgercast today with East York alum Doug Whiteside. And Doug has a particularly interesting story, so I think this is going to be super cool. And Doug, why don't we start with a simple, basic question? What are you doing after 30? It's almost been 30 years since you played. What are you up to these days? And why don't you let everyone know what that entails?
Well, I've been teaching with the Toronto District School Board for over 20 years. I've taught in a couple of leadership capacities as a lead teacher at 2 schools. I think I've been at 4 schools total over that 22-year period. I'm also a CrossFit coach, and I've worked at CrossFit AIO, which is a club in North York, all-in-one strength and conditioning. So I just actually took a break from that, and I'm working privately as well right now with an education company called the Ready Clinic, which focuses on dyslexic kids. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm married. I should have started with that, but I'm married with 2 beautiful kids. And we got a house in Toronto in the neighborhood where I grew up, pretty close to where I grew up. We bought a house in 2009, tore it down to the ground, and completely rebuilt. And this is our family home, and we hope to stay here for, indefinitely. We love our house, and I'm Scarborough born and raised, so still in Scarborough essentially, and no plans really on moving anywhere. I should.
You've got a lot on your.
What? Go ahead.
Yeah, you've got a lot on your plate, clearly. So that's a lot that you've got going on at any particular time. And have you cloned yourself like Dolly the sheep?
Well, with teaching, I've tried to go the admin route to principal. I haven't been successful with that. That's been a bit of a point of contention in the house here. So I've kind of put that idea on the shelf. But I've always had another sort of, whether it's a job or hobby or passion on the side. I did some coaching in baseball early in my career with Birchmount and then with North Toronto. I found when I transitioned to North Toronto that parents were a bit too intense for me there. So I focused my coaching instead just on the school level, and I found that to be enormously rewarding because for the most part I've taught at inner city schools, and they've never played baseball before. Most of them are cricket players, right? Like great athletes, great hand-eye coordination, and it's so amazing to teach the game from the ground up with a total clean slate with coachable kids. And yeah, now it's slow pitch. It's not hardball or anything of that nature, but still very rewarding. And they've got it set up where you can work towards a city championship. We did win one, I think, in 2005 at the school I was at. But so it gets competitive, but tons of fun.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, education is something that is a fabric that runs through your life, and it seems like you get a lot of meaning out of it. Are your kids involved in organized sports, and are you having to run all over Hell's Half Acre getting them from point A to point B?
They are. I coached my son in baseball. I was really hoping that he'd take to that. He did T-ball and then four pitch, and my daughter did as well. And then COVID hit, which, put the brakes on all organized sports. And after COVID, they didn't want to go back to team sports. So my son got into wrestling, which was another sport that I was passionate about in high school. Not at Brock, but in high school. And my daughter is really into gymnastics. So my son did wrestling for 2 years, and now he's in gymnastics with my daughter. So that seems to be their passion. However, my son yeah, it's great. My son just recently registered for Topham Park softball, which is like fast pitch. So I'm going to try to get involved just as an assistant coach. My wife does not want me in the head coaching role. She's seen too intense. Even with four pitch, she thought it was too intense, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I'm just going to be probably coaching first base and keeping score. But yeah, very involved with my kids. But yeah, they sort of took to the individual sports over the team sports, which is fine with me, and we'll see where that leads. I know great athletes, I think yourself included, who didn't really take to baseball or team sports until high school level, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, late bloomers. I mean, I was playing soccer all the way along, and played on the high school football, basketball, volleyball team. So I did do a lot of team sports when I was in grade school, but baseball was very, very late, and it was only because in my OAC year, I didn't want to be playing, football. They always wanted me to play quarterback in football, and when you're left-handed, yeah, it's and they don't pass the ball. It didn't have a lot of appeal to me because I just thought I'm going to be a tackling dummy here, or just turn around and hand it off constantly. So, I played tight end and I played defensive end because I really liked the idea of crushing people because, it was kind of fun. But, I do think that kids, the switch can go off at any time, Doug. They can really just all of a sudden decide that they're going to get involved with something. I have two daughters, obviously, who are older, 19 and 20, and they were playing hockey early, but then they discovered other passions like soccer, volleyball a little bit later. So, I just think also with COVID, there's a lot of kids in general are still trying to figure it out a little bit. They want to figure out, so we'll talk a little bit about COVID and
post-COVID. We'll talk about that later. Okay.
Yeah, I think we want to touch on when you get back to the classroom, because that was a stressful time to be a teacher, obviously, and your observations on how you could impact kids' lives in classroom as opposed to doing it online. I think there's a big difference. And also a little bit of what you're seeing. There's some hangover with some of the kids in terms of mental health and ability to socialize, and, how you're finding, is teaching more challenging now than it was prior to the pandemic, those kinds of things.
I would definitely say so. And my wife agrees. The mental health component, kids are struggling in terms of developing interpersonal relationships. Friendships are a little bit more guarded, and that translates into difficulty with group activities and things of that nature, right? Because we were online for quite some time. It was 2 or 3 year period intermittently, right?
Yeah, very, very difficult, I think, to navigate.
Yeah, now there are mental health supports that are being put in place, but it's sort of in a mandated capacity. I'd like to see mental health really be part of the curriculum as kind of an accessible piece for each kid to see how well. I mean, we have that in terms of learning skills, but it would be nice to have that on more of a summative basis. So regular check-ins with social workers, with all the kids, not just the ones who need it the most, right? Sometimes it's the quietest kid who really is hiding the most issues.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great point. We'll come back to it. Why don't we hop in the Doctor Who TARDIS here and go back to, you growing up in Scarborough and, your formative years in terms of your influences, whether it's siblings or family or friends, and a little bit how you came to discover both a love of athletics and a love of baseball. And was there any inclination when you were young that teaching was in your future, or were you looking at different things then?
Well, yeah, like I said, I grew up in Scarborough. My dad, my late father, was a hard-nosed police officer, police detective, and my mom later became a nurse. Um, my dad was an athlete when he was younger. He played as far as junior B hockey. His claim was that he played with Bobby Orr. Yeah, big hockey guy, but really didn't push us towards hockey. He was sort of bitter about it in terms of where he was able to make it, and I think he had some quarrels with some coaches on the way up, similar to what I did, I guess, later on. Um, but yeah, baseball. I was playing catch with my dad in the backyard one day, and he happened to notice that I was able to catch the ball and throw it really well. And before too long, he was inviting some of his police buddies over, and they'd have beers in the backyard, and he'd be like, "Check out my son's arm," and they'd throw a glove on, and we'd play catch. And yeah, so he got me into t-ball, and I really stood out in t-ball, I would say. So I played 1 year of t-ball, and then they moved me up to tyke. So I moved up an age bracket, and I found I was able to hit the ball when it came in pitched. So that was pretty satisfying at that age. So yeah, I played hockey, house league hockey, and house league baseball at that time, and my dad kind of made my brother and I decide. My brother was doing the same thing. I've got a younger brother, Kevin. He asked us to decide at a young age what it was going to be, baseball or hockey. So I decided baseball was where I was going to go. I kept on playing house league hockey, but I kept going with baseball. So yeah.
Yeah, and did you? I mean, as you kind of progress along, are you into a rep program in Birchmount or at what point do you cross over to go start playing in East York?
Well, that happened later. That didn't happen until high school. But
Okay.
I'll just back up a little bit. My
Yeah.
parents sent me to a baseball camp at Bond Park, which was all the North York kids, right? And there was a skills competition up there, and I didn't know any of the kids, but I won that skills competition, and it was all various skills involved with baseball, throwing, catching, running, hitting, whatever. So my dad was really impressed with that and said, "Okay, well you got to take it up a notch, right? So we'll sign you up for the rep team." It was Birchmount, and I played early on with Grucci, I think, like Pee Wee and minor band. I know him from way back. Yeah, so it was Birchmount up until around grade 8, and then I transitioned to East Toronto, and that's when I really started to take off with baseball. And I was playing shortstop and pitching, and I played for a Peace Games team. We had a Peace Games team that played a team in Indianapolis, and then they came here and billeted and played us, and that was a pretty awesome experience. And I played really well in those tournaments. So yeah, early on I seemed to really kind of shine and hit the ball really hard, pitched, played shortstop, and just loved it. Loved playing baseball. And I went to Green Diamond baseball camp. I don't know if you know about that. It's up in Richmond Hill. I was there for a number
Yeah.
of years. Anyway, Huey Walters was the big camp coordinator
Yeah.
there and coach, and he took me under his wing almost right away when I was there, and talked to my dad and said, your son, he's good. He's a good player. And yeah, when I was 14, Huey asked me to go and work out with somebody Huey knew. I don't know who it was, but somebody big time, like a scout for the early Ontario Blue Jays. And the workout was to take place in Peterborough. So my dad drove me there, and I worked out with this guy, and Hugh was there. And I was 14, and the guy said to my dad, he's definitely got scholarship potential. So we just went crazy with that news, right? It was just the greatest thing that could ever happen, really, is in terms of my pathway in baseball. So that was my identity, like really early on, was a baseball player, nothing else, right?
Okay.
I'm going to do anything else with my life, just baseball. So, I moved on to East Toronto, played there, and we won like a Scarborough championship in grade 9. And then I was going to transition to North York with Coach Noel Creighton. I don't know if you know that name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and he was a hardcore coach. I worked out with North York just in the gym, and I was prepared to transition from East Toronto to North York. But I was getting in trouble at school. I was involved with kind of the wrong group of friends, and school really wasn't on the radar for me. I was struggling, and just really scraping by. And my dad said, well, you need a job. Like, a job is something that will kind of teach you about responsibility and something beyond school, because I'm not sure where school is really going to take you. You got baseball, but what are you going to do? You're going to play in some hick town in the U.S.? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
For sure. Like, send me to rural Alabama for the rest of my life. That's me. So anyway, he had contacts through the police with the Jays, and he said, put your application in for the Jays. I thought I'd be selling hot dogs, but I went down there for an interview with the manager of event operations at the Dome, and he brought me down to the clubhouse and walked me around the Jays clubhouse, and I was completely starstruck, and I was kind of having heart palpitations with what was going on. All the jerseys were hung up, and this was in early 92. So then he said, part of the job in working with the clubhouse is you've got to do X number of duties, but you also have to go out on the field, and you're either a bat boy, a ball boy, or you're down the line playing catch with the outfielders. I'm like, well, I'm down the line. Like, that's where I want to be. And he said, okay, well, let's go out on the field and throw just to make sure you can throw. So I had a spring in my step, and we went out to the field, and he stood out in center field. I stood on the left field line, and I was just throwing lasers. And after about 5 throws, he said, oh yeah, okay, you're good. You can throw. So I was in just absolute heaven at this point, right? I mean, I've got this job working with the Jays. So I don't know if you want to take a break from there.
No, I mean, you're playing in high school, probably, obviously, and at some point you're also playing in rep, right? So, when do you end up with the?
So East Toronto would have been in rep, but I think it's an important piece to talk about the Jays.
Yeah.
I had planned on talking about that, so I had to take. I continued to play with East Toronto. I went back to play with East Toronto because Noel Creighton was not going to have me play just half time.
Yeah.
And Birchmount did not have a baseball team. However, they did have the BEAT program, which was the Birchmount Exceptional Athlete Program, which I qualified for, which was kind of cool because they had us training like really hard, lifting weights, running plyometrics, running with like parachutes, hardcore training as part of our regular phys ed program. So that was cool. I got into some pretty good shape, and I had a pretty good physique even in grade 10. But anyway, I couldn't play full time in that grade 10 year, so I got right into this job with the Jays. And I remember they had an exhibition series against the Pirates in early March, and I had to set up the locker room in the Pirates locker room. So of course the first jersey I grab is number 24, Bonds, right?
Yeah.
So I set up Bonds's locker, and then I set up the next guy I knew on the team, which was Andy Van Slyke. So I set up his locker, and then a couple of minutes later, in comes Andy Van Slyke, and he said, "Hey, you got to move my locker." I'm like, oh, I didn't know how to respond, just starstruck. And he whipped out $20 and put it in my hand. He goes, "Move my locker." And then the clubhouse manager goes, "Welcome to the big leagues, boys." So that was cool. That was my introduction to that job.
So Doug, let me ask you this. You're kind of in school, but having a difficult time finding an academic or an education path. You're really in love with baseball, obviously, and playing, but you're also, the job is now feeding that love. That type of stuff is not gonna, morph or adjust. You're throwing some gasoline on that fire about wanting a career in baseball. So did it ever occur to you to, at this point, look at working for the Jays full time? Is this something that you wanted to do down the line, or are you still just kind of figuring things out?
In the back of my mind, I still had my pathway was still making it to the major leagues as a player, which was delusional at the time. But I didn't have anyone telling me that wasn't going to happen. Everyone around me was sort of reinforcing that, right? And it was all encompassing at that time. I got that job, and then I had new friends. I had a girlfriend at the time. People just seemed to be really interested in me as the person who worked with the Jays and as this baseball guy, right? So anyway, getting into the season there, I had to leave every day from school a little bit early, but the school was understanding about that. And I would go down there for night games. And about halfway into the first month, so into April, I was warming up Candy Maldonado down the line. And I threw one that was a short hop. It wasn't a terrible throw or anything. But he was a little bit irritated by it, I could tell. And then he threw it back to me. Really hard, he threw it back to me. And then I just started throwing it all over the place. And it just became a vicious cycle. And the ball no longer felt like the ball anymore. It started to feel like a foreign object, right?
Mm.
I just started kind of freaking out, really. And after the game, I guess he reported it to the clubhouse manager. He said, "Yeah, Candy said you were having difficulty out there today." And he said, is it, do you think you just aren't able to do this job, or do you think it's just nerves? And I said, "Well, it's just nerves." And he said, "Okay, well, let's go out there and just make sure." So we went back out to the field, and I threw with him, and I was okay. I was fine. And then the Jays that night went on a road trip, and I'm like, okay, this is going to pass. And I ended up having a practice with the East Toronto team that I was playing with at that time. It was a practice in the gym. And I went in there and started throwing, and I was spiking the ball and throwing it like I'd never thrown a ball before in my life. Like, it was crazy. So at this point, I'm really kind of freaking out, thinking this isn't going to go away, right? This isn't going to go away. The Jays ended up coming back, and I started throwing with Maldonado again, and he started getting really irritated with me. And eventually he said, we shouldn't be throwing together. So he started throwing with a guy from the bullpen. A guy would come out of the bullpen and throw with him. So I felt like a complete failure, just devastated, right?
So Doug, let's push not the brakes, but I do want to say that, like, there's multiple examples in baseball of people who develop. It's it's a golf term, the yips, but
right. It
really
has happened
it's
as well, not nearly as bad, but
yeah.
It has happened.
But in baseball, Steve Sachs or Mackie Sasser, these are very famous examples of people who just all of a sudden couldn't do very routine things. Sachs
Right.
couldn't throw from second base to first, and Sasser, who was a catcher, couldn't throw it back to the pitcher. And, he could throw it to second on a line, but to the pitcher, it just ended up killing their careers.
Right.
Did any of your coaches or did anyone have any inclination that you're likely at this point developing some sort of psychological issue that needs treatment for you to be able to do basic things on a baseball field? Or did you just swallow it and just change your position so you could get to somewhere that was more functional?
There was no psychological intervention. No, nothing. John Sullivan, who was a coach with the Jays at the time, he really tried to work with me. And because he noticed that when Devon White was running out to center field, I could lead him with a throw that was, 200 feet away and hit him in the chest almost every time. But then when Maldonado stood 30 feet away, just like you were saying, right, I would clam up and start to struggle. But no, at no point did anyone say this might be some sort of psychological issue that we need to really deconstruct, or an anxiety piece. I certainly didn't hear the word anxiety. I didn't know that, there was such a thing at the time. So yeah, I just plowed through. I remember my dad saying, well, maybe you just won't be able to throw anymore. So that was, but I couldn't accept that, right? Because everything was tied in with my ability to play. Everything. Like my friendships, my entire identity, right? So much was crammed into my ability to shine in that role, that looking back, it was just an unbelievable amount of pressure to go out there in front of 50,000 people every night and think this is not, at first it was nothing. It was, this is no big deal at all. It's second nature to me to just act like I'm a player. I thought I was a player. In effect, I was. There's 9 players out there, plus one more in a uniform who's actively playing, and that's me. So I considered myself. I had a locker in the clubhouse. It was like I was a player. So I put just an unattainable amount of pressure on myself to succeed in that role. So I just started to get really nervous. Like I was freaking out. If they put somebody else in left field other than Maldonado, I was fine. But it was just the one person. I just couldn't seem to. I don't know. I just experience with him.
Doug, I don't think there's easy answers, right? Like, because it's a self-inflicted scenario, right? Where you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and and having so much of your value as a person tied to doing that perfectly all the time. And the reality is, a 30-foot throw you're more than capable of making, because you can throw one 200 feet and be fine with it. But it's, there's clearly more going on psychologically. And, again, Rick Ankiel was another great example of this.
There's countless examples. Most recently is Tyler Matzek, Braves.
Yeah.
Now there's a person in the U.S. named Richard Kuhn. I can't remember the name of his company. It's called Peak Performance, I believe. He ended up, he had the yips in his senior year at, I think, Connecticut as a pitcher, and it shut down his career. He set an NCAA record for the most wild pitches in an inning, and that shut him down. So he ended up becoming a Navy SEAL and developing a peak performance mental fitness program that focuses exclusively on the yips. So he's worked with Matzek. He's worked with countless players. I reached out to him, but at this point I'm not playing anymore. But I did play in a men's league 3 years ago, and it started to resurface. So I reached out to him at that time.
Okay,
And,
well, let's
go ahead.
I think that's amazing that you're self-aware to that extent, but having to conquer something like that on your own is almost impossible. There are likely no psychologists or psychiatrists or experts in the field that are easily accessible to help with things like that. So why don't we? It's great to have that as a backstory for what happens next. So at some point you're playing in East York for Andy Green, I think, with the.
Right. So
now, do you shift positions, Doug, or do you make it known to, you've got some attention from the US, you're looking at different options. Is it just something that you hide at that point because you moved to the outfield?
Well, I went into East York just saying I was an outfielder, right? I didn't draw any attention to the fact that I used to play infield. I just tried out as an outfielder.
Okay.
With
and are you comfortable making the throw from the outfield at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was. I mean, I hit the cutoff man fairly consistently. Every once in a while it would surface. It would surface. And it would surface at really strange times, like in warm-up when I'm playing catch on the sidelines with somebody new, right? At Brock, go ahead.
Did you feel that this affected your confidence as a player?
Absolutely, 100%. Now, I had confidence as a hitter, and I had a really polished swing, like a really good swing that, coaches would compliment all the time. So I was pretty fast. I ran, well, in the U.S., I ran a 6.9, but that was about my best, 6.960. So I knew I had other tools. If I could just get by with throwing, then I think my other tools were probably good enough to go somewhere, if not get drafted, then at least to, college on some level or just attain some level of success, right?
Well, this is a lot to hang around your neck, at the end of the day. So where do you go when you get to the tail end of high school and, you're still obviously very much identifying as a baseball player and wanting to pursue that dream, even though you've got some pretty heavy stuff on your back at this point. Where do you go?
Well, I was going to go to Carleton, actually, because I wanted to get into the journalism program. I started to pick it up academically in high school. So I was interested in that. I got in, and I started to think, you know what, this is not really going away. Like this, the elephant in the room as far as my baseball ability goes. So I should probably explore something else. And then during that summer season, we were playing Leaside, and it was a relatively close game. I was up to bat, and I got a belt high fastball, and I hit this ball over the center field fence, over Eglinton Avenue, and just well into the night. Right, it was one of those home runs where you just feel absolutely nothing. And completely.
So I assume this is in Talbot Park, because if you're hitting it over Eglinton, you're in Talbot Park.
No, this is Talbot. Yeah. Now I know that's a short porch in left field, but this was straightaway center field. So well over Eglinton.
Yeah, well, to hit it over the road is a good shot, man. Like
it really was. Yeah, and even the guys at the scoreboard were like, "Wow, that's one of the longer ones I've seen." So I didn't hit a lot of home runs. I only hit like a handful, but that one, when I hit it, I'm like, that's serious, right? Like if I can hit a ball like that, then maybe there is still something there, right? Now that March break, I had gone down to California. My uncle lives there in San Jose, and I worked out with this junior college team called Gavilan College, and I took BP and did infield, outfield, like pregame, and played great. Didn't have the yips. And they said, we can work with you. We can definitely work with you. So that was always a possibility as well. So I was kind of toying with the idea of either going to Carleton or going to Gavilan College, junior college in San Jose. And then after I hit that bomb, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give this a go. I'm going to see where this goes.
Okay.
So ended up going down to California.
And tell me about California. Let's skip the school and the baseball part. Is it as much of a 3D color-filled movie as one would think? What was California like?
It really is. It's amazing. I paid $800 for this old 1980 yellow Ford Fairmont car, and I would drive from the house I was in, which is in a town called Gilroy, to this beach called Manresa Beach whenever I had free time, and I'd go there just by myself and try to surf. Yeah, it was amazing. Like, perfect climate, sunny every day. The people just are really active. It's just an instant hit of dopamine once you get there. There's just that degree of happiness that you don't generally see here to the same extent. So,
yeah, they also don't have to scrape their cars off in the winter.
well, this is just
maybe
for sure. Yeah, no rust, no snow. So that '84 Fairmont could last forever, essentially, right? It didn't last forever.
Yeah. And did it feel, did you feel any form of homesickness, or at this point you're pretty much out on your own and this is where you're at? So home is in California while you're attending junior
Well, when
college.
we got there, we had a couple of workouts, and I was playing well. I think it was just the atmosphere. Like, I was really dialed in those first few days, and we played this all-star team from Japan who had flown in to stay in billet and play us for a weekend series. And they put jerseys along the dugout for the starting lineup against Japan, and I didn't know where I stood at that point. But they announced the lineup, and then you would walk up and grab a jersey, and they called my name. I was starting in right field. So I was super pumped, right? I put the jersey on, and the coach says to me, "So you're a Canadian kid playing in California against Japan. How does that feel?" I'm like, it's a dream. It doesn't get any better. It's amazing. So that weekend, I really rose to the occasion, hit the ball hard. Defensively, I played okay, not great, but caught every fly ball that was hit my way. Stole a couple of bags. So they were pretty pumped about me. And I got in wicked shape to go down there too. I looked like a baller. I looked like an athlete. So yeah, I played through fall ball there and did fairly well. I was on the cusp of making the starting lineup. And then, yeah, homesickness, I don't really think it was a thing really in the fall. I was so just enthralled with everything around me and just thrilled to be there. And I was making some pretty good friendships too. They were great guys on that team, really solid dudes. And yeah, I came back for the Christmas holidays, and I went to Montreal with my high school buddies. And yeah, my buddies are, I kind of have a rough crew of people that I grew up with, great dudes that, I'm still tight with, but we certainly got into our share of trouble. And when we were in Montreal over that Christmas break, we got into a fight with these guys from Boston, and I ended up having a boxer's fracture on my pinky. So I went back down to California with my hand in a cast, right? So
Yeah.
the coach was beyond pissed with me, like, just like, what's wrong with you? Like, you cracked the lineup, like you were on the cusp of playing, and I don't know, like, I couldn't explain it, just couldn't explain it, right? So yeah, the cast came off, I'd say about a month later, and I had to work my way back in. But by that point, they'd had, the outfield was solid. I only ended up having about 30 at bats for the whole season, so certainly not enough to justify going back. So overall, the spring season anyway was kind of a disappointment for me, and my parents were disappointed too. So
And Doug, did you feel that you had said, were the author of your own issue there? Like, were you self-aware enough at the time to go, yeah, I screwed up by doing this in Montreal? Or was it more, I can't believe this guy is sticking a pin into my dream here that I've been growing for 5 years?
I was self-aware enough to know that this is like, how could I let that happen? That was, I was ashamed.
Okay.
Embarrassed and ashamed.
Yeah. Well, it's big of you to know that at the time, because when you're young, like self-awareness is not a strength of young men, right? So,
Sure.
but it's good that you knew that. But so you come back from California, and now you got to. Do you have any clue what it is you want to do next, or is it just you're pretty devastated from how things turned out, and you're clearing your head a little bit at first?
Well, I was devastated. I had a chip on my shoulder, and I was angry. But I had contacted Coach McRae when I was down there, and I talked to him for about an hour. And he had told me, where the program was and who was on the team. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, I could try and make that team. I don't think I'm cracking that outfield with Tinish. I didn't know who Tinish was, but I'd heard of Bottomley before. And Daryl Houston I knew because I played against him, right?
Yeah.
So that outfield I didn't think I was going to crack. But I thought I had some friends at Brock who planned on getting a house off residence. So I thought, you know what, I'll just go there. I've got some friends and we'll see how baseball works out, right? So that's what I did. I came back, I played at East York, had a pretty good season. I think we went to provincials. We made it to Sunday, but didn't make it to the final, but we did okay. Good bunch of guys on that East York team, and it was a fun season.
And Andy Green didn't try to recruit you to U of T while he had you, was coaching you? Because he was one of the coaches at U of T.
I know. I remember having a conversation with him at one point when I came back, but it wasn't really in a recruiting capacity. But I did know that he was coaching U of T, yeah. But no, I don't remember any efforts on his part of trying to recruit me to U of T. No.
Okay.
So, yeah,
so
I came back.
You come to Brock in 96, though. We've got so Coach McRae has left the program between the conversation and you starting at Brock. So that's got to be a different dynamic right off the hop. And out of that outfield, two of the four that were there, Daryl Houston and Scott Juziak, are not back. So the dynamic is completely different from 95 to 96. Maybe some of the people you're familiar with, because there were 5 Oshawa guys there who would have played against you in East York. They're all gone. And so is your first contact with Coach Lounsbury, is that who you end up picking the conversation up with?
Yeah, it was. And I met him at Brock, and I think when he saw me, he thought, oh, wow, like there's a baseball player, because, I was tanned, I was pretty built, I was lifting a lot of weights, right? And I looked like a baseball player, and I did kind of carry myself outside the field like someone who played baseball, right? I was in really good shape, and I think he saw me and thought, wow, like this kid looks like a real player, right? Real baller. Mm-hmm. So he took me to the admissions office because I needed to see if my credits were going to be transferable, because if they weren't going to be transferable, then I was going to see if I was going to check out that Carleton option, right? It was still in the back of my mind. And they ended up being transferable. So he said, great. Well, I remember coming out of the admissions office and he said, I don't know who's more nervous about the outcome of that, me or you. Lounsbury said that to me. So without ever having seen me play, I think he just really had these high expectations of me, right?
Well, did he know your background though, Doug? Like if you
I came from. Okay, go ahead.
I think if you come with the expectation that you've played in California and you play at a program like East York, both of those things at this point are pretty proven. And we had been really quite vocal with the coaches who weren't as familiar with the Metro League as coaches who would have been in it. That players that came from there were seeing on par. Generally, at the top end of every rotation in the Metro League, there were 2 or 3 guys who were stateside. the quality of play was the highest probably in the province, because, when we would go to a LIMS in Sarnia or in Windsor, you're dealing with, out of the 12 or 13 or 14 teams there, 6 or 7 were coming from the Leaside League. I assume that Jeff is reacting because he's really counting on you to be a cornerstone piece of a team that is experiencing it's about 66% turnover from year to year. So he needs some building blocks. So if you look the part of a player and you've got the resume of a player, that's because he wants you to be one.
Yeah, definitely. And I understood that.
Did you feel that was putting some pressure before you even got in the door? That feeling?
No, I thought I was going to come in and just kick ass. I really did.
Okay.
I thought it was, yeah, I did. I was pretty cocky. So I came into camp. I came into camp and tried out, and tryouts seemed to go fairly well. I don't think I performed, fantastically well or anything, but I did okay, certainly enough to have made the team, and I ended up making the team.
Did you have a close enough relationship with any of the coaches to talk about what you'd been through, ergo your throwing and some of the anxiety?
No, I still hid that. Still definitely hid that. Now in California, that certainly surfaced a couple of times, but there were never any conversations about it. It was just expected that it would go away, Well, with the yips, it's like it's considered contagious, or certainly in that time it was, right? If someone's having an issue like that, it's not, at that point in time, people would just stay away from that guy. There's no level of intervention. It's just, come on, throw the ball, right? If someone's psychologically.
I think the Brock coaching staff, if you have Daryl Kemp on it, who had some exposure to pro baseball, but certainly would be familiar with, Mackie Sasser and Steve Sachs at that point, which are probably at that point the most publicized cases of it. They may have been more well-equipped to handle that than any other coaching staff in the country. But, if they don't know what they don't know, then they have no way of saying, okay, let's take a look at this. This is a guy that's got all the physical tools in the world. Why is this happening?
It really didn't surface. It really didn't surface early on. I think one time it did. I was inside and I was playing catch with Jess Dixon in the arena, and I was throwing the ball all over the place. But it wasn't bad enough to really turn the eye of any coaches,
But you clearly noticed yourself that
clearly noticed. I'm like, here we go. Here it is. Like, get me out of this situation. This is horror. This is life and death right now. Because when it surfaces, that's how I feel, right? That was the only time that it came up. Go ahead.
But that's a little bit like, you're kind of functioning with a sense of dread and anxiety because you feel that it's over your shoulder at any point. Mm-hmm. Did you feel this affected your relationship with the coaches or your teammates because you were feeling a little bit on edge?
Not really. I still presented myself with kind of a chip on my shoulder. I remember coming in and Coach Kemp said, "Where'd you play college ball?" And he was really interested in me, right? Because I looked the part. And I don't know. Sorry, I'm struggling with that question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, no. I do feel that because you've got this situation that's anxiety driven. Do you feel it affected your relationships with the coaches or the other players, where you felt maybe nervous, or in your case, chip on your shoulder is a good way of putting it, but chip on the shoulder is typically something you reserve for your opponents. Mm-hmm. And not something you wear around a clubhouse, right? You're supposed to kind of function in a team environment as we're all naked here together, literally sometimes. And we got to just, be completely open with each other, know what we do well and what we don't. So
I would have presented myself with a chip on my shoulder around my teammates. So
okay.
that's opposed to around against the opposition. So yeah, I'm not proud of the way that I presented myself. I was just ego driven. Yeah, and I felt I kind of had to be that way to overcome my issue at the time.
That's an amazing, most people can't, tune into themselves enough to understand that. So tell
Mm-hmm.
me how your season goes, as what your experiences were like with a team that went back to the national championship. So highly successful year for sure. But how did
Yeah,
you feel you played?
well, the first series we had was against U of T at Stan Wadlow Park, right? So that felt, I mean, that's familiar territory. My dad showed up for that game with the camera. And I don't know if that was a regular season game or if it was preseason, but I played really well that game. I stole first and second every time, or first and third. What am I talking about? Sorry.
Second and third?
Yeah, stole second and third every time I got on base. And I was, firing the ball to the cutoff man. And I can't remember if I got a few hits anyway. But after the game, Coach Kemp came up to me and said, "You played a hell of a ball game today." And I said, "Well, thanks. Like, coming from Coach Kemp, that means the world, right?" And he said to me, "Is your dad here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you want me to talk to him?" And I'm like, No, it's okay." I found that kind of strange that he said that. Like, talk to him about what? Like,
I don't find it strange at all. And I played with Daryl, and Daryl coached me. Uh, Daryl is really, really good at the little touches that make people feel less anxious. And that includes your parents. Your parents are going to be a little bit anxious about you being away. You're in St. Catharines, it's your second stop on your post-secondary journey. And, I think Daryl's a great coach who has a real understanding of, sometimes it's not how he works with you. It's going to be how he works with others who are in your circle to have them understand that you're in good hands. It was someone who's going to invest time in making you a better ball player. And because it's famous with Daryl Kemp, Daryl will, go up to a person and say, "I think you need a little extra BP. Why don't you and I shoot off to a school tomorrow at 3:30 before there's practice, and we'll take BP for an hour." And just he invests in people, Doug, and it's. I think that was his way of investing in you as a person and then as a student athlete, and probably thinking that could make you a better player because coaches.
Here's how I interpreted that exchange. I thought, would you like me to talk to your dad meant, I'm going to talk to your dad about maybe not playing here at Brock, that you should be playing in the U.S. That's how my ego-driven sort of mentality at the time was processing that particular exchange.
Daryl would never do that because he would want you to go through a full year at Brock. They did it with Andy Tinish and they did it with Jeff Hoover, where it was put in your time, and then after the season, because you're committed to a team, Daryl will pick up the phone and place people if he thinks that they've got ability or aspirations that are bigger than the program at Brock was capable of delivering. Now, at the time, if you have someone like myself around, I think I would have had probably the perspective, probably not at 20, but I certainly, or at that time I was 23, but I certainly know now, 50 games, which is roughly what Brock was playing between spring and fall, and enough showcasing against American D1 and high-profile D2 and JUCO schools.
Sure.
Plus having a J scout on staff and Daryl means that everyone's going to get the exposure that they need. If you are a diamond in the rough, Daryl's a scout. He wants to sign players for the Toronto Blue Jays. So, like they will find a way to create the right path for people. And for a guy like Jeff Hoover, for example, it was to play 1 year at Brock so that he could work on some things and get the right opportunity to play. The main thing about going to the US is to not have the experience you had in the back half of your stay in California where you're not playing. Mm-hmm. And Coach McRae, Coach Kemp, Coach Lounsbury are all about people that get the playing time that they require to become not only better players, but better people. So I can see how that could get misinterpreted, given that you're floating in a different mental space and emotional space at the time, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, so that's that particular series. I think it was like just a doubleheader. I got hit by a pitch, I think, twice. And after the game, Coach Lounsbury said, if that happens in the future, we will protect you. If you feel that you're being thrown at, our pitchers will protect you. A doubleheader. So
Doug, you have
I remember getting hit by a pitch maybe a couple of times. And Coach Lounsbury said to me after the game, he said, if that happens in the future, we will protect you. Our pitchers will protect you. So, yeah, I found that little piece was reassuring. It was reassuring at the time,
Did you have a stance of some sort that? Okay, did you have a stance that led to you? Did you lean out over the plate, or?
I don't think I had a stance that
was there a reason why you were getting
different from any normal stance. I just happened to get hit.
Yeah.
So I felt between Coach Kemp and Coach Lounsbury,
so
I felt that I had kind of the confidence of the coaches at that point in time. And I felt like my role on the team was fairly solid as the left fielder at that point in time.
Okay. And so how does the season progress from there, where you're feeling that the coaches are believing in you, and you guys have a pretty successful campaign, obviously with good results, but tell me how the season progresses for you and how you're still operating a little bit with a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, I didn't have a great season offensively, I don't think. I was only hitting about 265, 270, something like that. So I was certainly given enough opportunity to succeed. I had some games where I really rose to the occasion, hit the ball hard. I didn't hit any bombs, though. I think that's what they were looking for from me as a corner outfielder, was some power, right? And, I had power. I would hit the ball out in BP. But I just didn't produce in the power department the way that they were expecting. And I think that just was because I was pressing. I was pressing from day one to really, fulfill the expectations that I had of myself. Not so much the expectations they had, but the expectations I had for myself.
Yeah. Did you feel that, again, there seems to be a thing that's hindering your ability to enjoy the game? Were you feeling tense around your teammates, and did you feel that you could go to one of the coaches and say, I'm feeling that I'm not living up to what I expect of myself?
No, I was kind of hiding it at the time. I remember playing when we played in really cold weather. Just my mindset being like, this sucks. Why am I here? Like 6 months ago, I was playing in, 80-degree weather, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So there was an element of depression, I think, when I was out there playing. Rather than fun, I think I was just generally sad. Just kind of had a melancholy sort of presentation going on. Occasionally, I'd try and crack jokes, with the team, but my behavior was just kind of outside the box from what you would expect of a college baseball player, right? I was either really sad or I was, out partying and acting crazy,
Okay.
So yeah, just not behaving or acting the way in which I know I probably should have, right? I remember there was one incident which might have been a tipping point with the coach. Yeah, we had a party at my house and we were doing mushrooms. And I went out to the campus pub and we were doing a fundraiser that night, right? I don't know if you want to include this or whatever. But when we were at the bar, we weren't supposed to drink. And I wasn't going to follow that rule. And I decided I was going to grab a beer. And Coach Lounsbury saw me do that and came right up to me and got right in my face, right? Like just he was furious. And in the condition I was in, I just wasn't processing that. I was kind of freaking out. But I could tell that, something had shifted in terms of his overall perception of me, right? And I was behaving like a degenerate. So, why wouldn't that have shifted at that point in time, right? So yeah, I was kind of developing sort of an oppositional attitude towards the coaches, I'd say maybe halfway through the season. Not towards all the coaches, but probably towards Coach Lounsbury in particular. Yeah, so it just wasn't really a fun time. It wasn't a fun time for me. And I would plow through pretending that it was.
No.
But it really wasn't. And it comes down to the issues that I was trying to hide, that I wasn't really able to, fulfill my potential on the field. And the reasons for that was because of some issues that I just didn't know how to deal with. Now, there were issues at home as well. My parents were going through a divorce, and my brother had moved out of the house. Earlier in the 90s, my dad was one of the arresting officers in the Bernardo investigation. So he had done some pretty heavy caseloads that had taken some toll on him. So yeah, all those things sort of accumulated and came to a head at that point in time. And I just wasn't able to be happy with anything that I was doing. I should have been, but I just wasn't able to. Well, I started
How was your schoolwork
in phys
going
ed,
at this
and
time? Was
I
it
thought that
suffering
was
as well?
just a waste of time. I didn't find I was learning anything in that program, so I switched to history, and I took to it. I was really interested in what I was reading. I've always been a decent writer, so I got pretty involved in my essay work. I would go up to the tower at Brock on the 8th floor, and there was like a corner desk, and I would go there early in the morning with a stack of books, and I would just read and write all day by myself, right? I'd take a break every once in a while and go down to Tim Hortons, or go to class. But yeah, I was able to apply myself, not extremely well, but certainly well enough to get by, right?
And because you've got some friction with the coach, do you find it difficult to get close to teammates? Like, how would you describe your relationship with your teammates who are probably pretty intuitive in sense that not everything is right? Like you're probably a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, but you're manic, right? So you're up and down and tense, not performing at a level that they've likely seen you do in practice. Those are typical telltale signs, right? I know that as a guy that's been a leader on a few teams where I would go up to a guy that I'd seen play better before and, take him out for a beer and say, hey man, what, are you okay? But I assume that your teammates probably not understanding that you've got this firestorm at home and you're dealing with the hobgoblin of the yips and, getting into it with Lounsbury, at a fundraiser. Again, I feel that maybe, you're taking on so much on your own shoulders Did you not,
At no
probably
point did
not
I talk
feel
or
comfortable going to a teammate
expose
and saying, man, this is what I'm
what was
going through
going
right now?
on at home or on the field or with the yips. I wasn't comfortable exposing vulnerability on any level at any time. I had to put on that tough guy face.
Okay. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this changes when you meet your wife. Okay. A lot of people, their lives start to turn around. What's a turning point for you, knowing that at this point, this feels you're probably upset with yourself because you feel you're not living up to your potential. When did things start to
Yeah,
turn?
I would
Does
say
that
that
come
was the
after you
turning
leave
point. It
Brock?
was when I met my wife, which was 2008. Well, we had met earlier on. We spent time at the same school, working at the same school. But we reconnected in 2008. I found out later it was a setup. I was coaching baseball, and she happened to be coaching on the other team for the other school, coaching third base, and she was looking really amazing. And I'm like, wow, what's going on here, right? I haven't seen Heather on a baseball field before. And sure enough, after the game, we went out as a group, and then that was the beginning of our relationship. But yeah, she has been my number one advocate in terms of change and, really seeing myself as a person of value and valuing my skills and celebrating the soft sides. I'm a very empathic person. You mentioned seeing teammates and being able to reach out to them. Well, maybe not in a sports setting am I like that, or in a baseball setting in particular, but generally in life, if I see someone who I feel is having a hard time, that's me. I'll approach them and engage in dialogue and try to get some understanding where I might be able to help, or at least offer resources and point them in the right direction to where they might be able to resolve whatever's going on. So,
Well, I think, everyone's kind of got a hitching post in their life where they feel it click. And for you, it sounds like you needed someone safe that you could open up to and just be yourself, not a version of yourself that you feel that you need to be a great ball player, or you feel you need to, you know, it's exactly the person that you needed in your life to not have a chip on your shoulder with, right? So why don't we back it up a little bit? How do you finish up at Brock? And I think you've told me about another situation with the coach where you got
yeah,
hit by a
so
pitch in London, and um, and it'd
sure.
be interesting to get
Yeah.
my perspective on this, because I've hit a few
So yeah,
pitches
that
with the
first
ball.
year we went to nationals. I
But
started pretty well every game, so I'm thankful for that. I had some success in the U.S. when we played in St. Bonaventure and Lemoyne. I banged out some decent hits, so I'm happy to say like I was able to hit the ball at a Division I level, or play at a Division I level, right? Or play against a Division I team. Not everyone can make that claim, right? That's something that's a pretty decent accomplishment. Now we made it to nationals. Uh, we had the final game against Trevor Wambach. My first at bat, I hit him hard to the right field gap, but stood on second base and didn't score. And I think we only got 3 hits off him that day. So he really shut us down, and that was devastating, that loss. Because I'd never won a full championship in baseball before. So I was really after that title. I wanted that so badly, and just came up short. So that was really hard to deal with. Now I continued at Brock. We played the spring season. I remember the yips really coming up in the spring season in the gym workouts again. And I'm like, man, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to play. Like, I've got to get through this. Was able to calm down a little bit in the spring season. I played a couple of games. We went down to the U.S., I think, once. Down to Lemoyne, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then that summer, after my first year at Brock, I didn't play ball at all. I worked at a golf course. Had an awesome summer. Played a ton of golf. It was a course in Bob Cajun. And I remember connecting with a group of kids at a local park there, and I would get together with them about once a week and just throw and take BP and stuff. So that sort of kept me in shape. But I don't think Coach Lounsbury was impressed with the fact that I didn't play that summer. In fact, I sort of know he wasn't impressed by that. Because I remember getting a phone call from him. Like, he would call everyone and check in with them. And I remember receiving the call, and I'm like, "Hey, Coach, how's it going?" He's going, "Oh, pretty good. I'm just listening to the new Collective Soul album and checking in with everybody, you know?" And I'm like, yeah, exactly. I remember that, though, because I liked Collective Soul back then.
At least
I'm
it
like,
wasn't
okay,
Journey.
I like Collective Soul, too. Yeah, so we had a good discussion, and I said I didn't play ball that summer, so I'm not sure that he knew exactly, you know, where I was going to fit in. I didn't know if I was going to make the team, to be honest, going back. But I did, and I had a good camp. I went back in a really good camp, actually. And he said, "You know what, we'll probably get you in for more games than you think, but you're going to be rotating in with Mateki, who was my buddy. We ended up being pretty good buddies, Mateki and I. I was living with him that year. So yeah, I played that year, and I got a lot of reps in at center field, actually. I remember playing in London, and I was hitting the ball really hard, and he took Bots out and put me in center. And he did that a couple of times throughout the season. But when he did it, he would say, "Oh, Dougie's had a hell of a ball game. Bots can sit out. Bots can take a seat." And he would say that out loud, right? And I just thought that's kind of. I would look at Bots, and I could see that, like, he could hear the coach saying that. It was expressed openly to the whole team. Like, Dougie had a great ball game. Bots can take a seat. I'm like, that's great that I get into the game, but I could see that that's just. I don't know. It was an interesting way to go about commanding the operations of the team at that point. I thought, you know, maybe I'm just overthinking that. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I know Rick Bottom.
Yeah,
I know Rick Bottom
he is.
pretty
He's a
well.
super nice guy. So he's not the kind of guy that I would ever want to. I would never want to hurt his feelings, right?
No. But I think that Coach Lounsbury is likely at this point doing that because he knows that Rick is content with whatever that is. Like I've said multiple times that even though it irked me a bit, but irking me is a good thing on a ball field. Coach McRae could yell at me about throwing balls and strikes all he wanted, and it would affect my performance one iota. In fact, generally it would fire me up and I would get even better. But if he did that with, we had several pitchers some of whom were younger, others who had a different type of a psyche, that when he would do that, it would bring out the worst in them because they would put more pressure on themselves, right, and they would start to shut down a little bit. So, I think it all depends on who the audience is. But I think at this point, Doug, you're in a situation where, Coach Lounsbury doesn't have an intimate connection with you. And I don't mean that in any kind of X-rated way. What I mean by that is, by doing that, I think that's a trigger for your anxiety, right? The things with the yips, but it's also, this is a respected player, and it makes it look like I'm taking my chip on the shoulder edginess and rubbing him the wrong way, and you're putting me in a bad position, and all I really want to do is prove that I'm really good and I belong here. And sure. It just is feeding the wrong beast at this point, right? So, and I don't think that sits at Jeff's feet, truthfully, being a guy that has done this. I think the impetus, and you're probably not capable of it at 20. No one's capable of this early in their life. But, if they know that these things feed the wrong behaviors or the wrong attitude out of you, they'd likely avoid it, but they don't, because they don't, you haven't stepped up and said, Coach, can I speak to you alone? Like, here's a few things that I'm going through, and maybe these kinds of situations I feel really uncomfortable with. They're not mind readers and they don't know. So, like, that's, I think, something that is much more tangible now than it was 30 years
Sure.
ago. 30 years ago, there was a lot of coaching that was one size fits all. We have a program, you've got to fit into it. And if you don't, that's on you. Now we're much more in a world of, we have a program, but we do have some flexibilities here to allow people who are feeling a little bit different or wired a little bit differently or behave a little bit differently. We can then now be flexible enough to work on them and help them work on themselves so they can fit better, or we make some adjustments. And I just don't, I don't think that that's, I think that's a struggle across the board. Performance management and the management of people, particularly those that are under some form of duress,
for sure,
is something that's a struggle in life, right? People don't get the best out of their employees. People don't get the best out of their kids, and they're trying. They try everything that they know how, but sometimes it's
at any rate, I was able to get a few games in at center field, and I love playing center field. And I think I was fairly competent out there. So yeah, I had more fun playing that second year. I think the pressure was off. I would kind of rotate in. Mateki would sometimes play left. I'd sometimes play left. I'd get some reps in at center. And it was a pretty fun time that second year. But I remember that tournament, which was also second year, at Kinsman Stadium. So it was in Oshawa. We won the tournament fairly easily, and the final was against Durham College, I believe, and I think the score was 18-3 or something like that, and they threw in a position player towards the end of the game, and the guy hit 4 people in a row. And I was about to come up, and I said, if he hits me, like, he's not going to be hitting anybody else, right? So I went up, and sure enough, I was hit, and I walked out to the mound. I didn't run. But the first guy to get right in my face was Coach Lounsbury, right? And he said, that'll be the last thing you ever do on this team. So I just backed off, right?
And you got to remember that a position, Darryl Kemp tells a pretty famous story of him pitching and walking 21 guys in a row. And, so for non-pitchers, there's no way on earth that position player is wanting to hit 5 guys.
I don't know.
They're just trying desperately to find where the catcher's glove is.
It was, okay. I understand.
Well,
I understand it.
Doug,
we all thought,
pitched a long,
we certainly all thought from our side.
I pitched a long time. And
the game was finished. We were way out in front, and they were throwing at us. That's what everybody on the bench thought that. But
there's a point where you're making a mockery of the game, and hitting 5 people in a row is not, is not brawl material. It's just they're embarrassing at that point. So, I know because I've been in some hellacious brawls and started a few of them. When you throw at someone, you throw at one person and you hit them square under the ribs between the numbers, usually because they turn and you get them.
Sure.
And it's done and everyone knows, right? And, at a certain point when it starts to get into multiples like 5 in a row, that's just a mockery. That's just
just pack it in.
They're embarrassing themselves at that point. If you're Coach Dempster, at that point, you pull that guy from the game because it's, there's a point, and it's not, you're not going to solve anything by running out there. So I agree with Jeff. I mean, his wording was probably, again, the way that he addressed you is not effective with where your state of mind is, right? So it's hard. You're kind of like, damn it, you said you would protect me, and now
Right.
we're under siege from this guy that probably doesn't know what the hell he's doing, or is doing it very badly at this point. So it's all part of, this jigsaw puzzle that you've got going at Brock, where you're a little on edge, you got a little bit of a chip, you've got a coach who doesn't get you, or at least you guys haven't invested the mutual time together to really understand how the hell can I turn this to a point where this guy's having fun. And so now he's doing this to you, poking you in the chest a bit. It's hard. No one likes playing on a team where they feel that your own coach is your adversary. So I assume that moment, again, probably triggers you to a point where you're like, I'm not having fun again, where this is, my coach is ringing me out here in Kinsman. So
okay,
tell me
so
a little bit about how you finish up your second
I think
year.
we lost to Mac in the semifinals. So, and they went on to win the national title, I believe, right? That year? Yeah, so Brad Reeson was their star player. We had some heated games against those guys in the two. Well, I guess that's the purpose of this podcast, right? But certainly some very, very memorable games. And I played in every one of them that we played against Mac. But yeah, they took us down. Fairly close game, and I think they came from behind to beat us in the bottom of the seventh, right? Yeah, they did. That was that. And then I felt like everything was okay. Like we would just continue on as is. We had a team meeting the next day, and we were kind of discussing as players only, kind of discussing where we were going to move forward. And I just kind of got a sense that, maybe I'm not really part of this group moving forward. I didn't really feel like I wasn't an impact player by any stretch, right? So I'm certainly on the cusp where I could be cut. I could be cut if the coaches decide to go that way, or if the players decide to go that way, to be fair. Anyway, Coach Lounsbury gave me a call and asked me to come into his office the next day. And I went in. I didn't really know what to expect. I was hoping that he'd sort of talk about, the future and spring ball and whatever. But as soon as I walked in, he said, "We're going to let you go." So there was no segue. It was just, "We're going to let you go." And I said, "Okay." My reaction wasn't very nice. I said some things that definitely I regret. And his rationale was that he's looking at some different outfielders and that they're reconfiguring the team. And that was it. So I kind of stormed out of the room and then went through a period of depression, I would say, for about a month following that.
There's not.
And it was tough. It's hard to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I look at it's rationale is not required in this circumstance. I think we've been very open and transparent in this video cast here as to some of the factors that are adding up. Why don't we turn that into a positive and understand that maybe your baseball career, Brock, doesn't end in the best of ways for you, but maybe for your life, it triggers some changes that are really paying off today. So how do you decide that?
Well, my father was an instructor at Elmer at the time, the Ontario Police College. And I had assumed at that point that I would probably go in the same direction, but I never wanted to. I really, growing up, I saw what policing sort of the stresses of the job had done to my dad. And I swore I would never become a cop, but it seemed just to be my destiny, I suppose. And so I went to Elmer and I walked around and checked it out. I remember Ebel was there, at the time in one of his classes. I sat in a class with him, and I talked to him about the program, and I thought, okay, yeah, maybe this is something that I could probably do. So I did the application and went through it all and went to the final interview. And I think they sort of knew at that point that I just wasn't into it, and I didn't really put my best foot forward in the final interview. And as a result, that ended up not being my pathway, and which I found is kind of a relief, really. I mean, they said to me, if you fix this here and apply next year, you're going to get in for sure. And I said, no, I'm not going to apply again. So I applied to Teachers College, and I shadowed actually Huey. I got in touch with Hugh Walters again because I had worked at his baseball camp. I didn't touch upon that piece, but I'd worked at his baseball camp in high school. So we had an ongoing relationship, kind of. So I shadowed in his class for a couple of times and taught some lessons. And I'm like, you know what? I really like this. I love being in front of the class. And I love, sharing my ideas and creating projects and things of that nature. So, yeah, I applied to Duville College, which is right in Buffalo, because I couldn't quite get into Brock at the time. And I wanted to get in there as fast as I could. So it was around 2000 that I applied and got into Duville College, did the certification program there. And then as soon as I was finished, I got a job. So 2002, beginning of 2002, I began my career as a teacher. I had a grade 5 class to start off with. There was a lot of hiring going on at the time. So I had a grade 5 class that was not too far away from where I grew up. That was a cool experience. It was kind of thrown into the fire with 30 kids, but we had a great time that first year. And then there's a lot of surplusing that happens in teaching. So, meaning that there's more teachers than there are enrollment in the school. So I had to move schools after that first year, and I moved to the school, thankfully, where I met my wife. And we didn't start dating at that school until I left and went to another school. But yeah, I have had some great leadership opportunities. I started a grade 5 inner city hockey program around 2010 that ran for 3 years. 60 kids at 6 a.m. in the morning playing hockey. That was awesome. And I got really into CrossFit at the onset of CrossFit in North America, which would have been around 2009 as well. I got big time into that. Got my level 1 coaching certification, and then eventually my level 2, and then my CrossFit Kids. I really got into learning again. I think I was a late bloomer in terms of really applying myself academically. I got my principal certifications. Ended up going through the hiring process for principal 4 times and didn't get it. And that became another source of undue stress for me. And actually just recently I had to have surgery, I think. I don't want to attribute it to that, but I had some stomach issues going on. And right now I'm taking a break from the board, but I am, like I said, working privately and going to get back into the class as soon as I can.
Well, there's definitely a correlation
for
between stress and issues in your urinary tract and your colon. Yeah, for sure. And so, there's, I think you're a battler, right? Like, so for you, CrossFit is likely a way that you managed to park some of the stuff that was previously coming out in the form of a chip on the shoulder or yips.
Yeah.
Park that with something like CrossFit. And I think it's courageous that you've found something in a way of life that works for you.
Yeah, it does work. It does.
It's probably a more...
It definitely does work for me.
Go ahead.
Stress relief, I can talk it out. I've engaged in talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So that combined with physical therapy and lifting weights. That's the perfect mix for, for me, what for me would be sound mental health, right? So it's got to be the right combination of talking, of engaging in dialogue, whether it's with a good friend. Still got a great circle of good buddies. Some that I played sports with, some that I just grew up with. And we talk every day. You talk about, you've got great friends that you talk with every day, right? And I've just learned that it's better to expose vulnerabilities. It's much more healthy, and you don't have to live with that elephant in the room, no matter how big it is. There's always someone who's willing to listen, right?
Well, it takes a ton of courage to lay that out in front of people that may have found it confusing at the time, and now time in retrospect and some perspective for everybody from Coach Lounsbury to your teammates will have a better understanding. Like they'll have experienced some of this in their own lives, right? You just happen to be going through it when you're 20 years old, 19 years old. That is a tough time for anyone to handle these things, but other people, it hits when they're in their 40s. And for guys in particular, they really got to watch it. You got to drop in testosterone, you have a rise in cortisol, and you're dealing with the kinds of things that we see every day with the Chris Simons of the world and the rest of it. And the fact you've addressed it and found a path that works for you. And I think it's important for teammates to be supportive and understand that maybe for the first time in a long time, you can take a ball field and feel happy about it, as opposed to feeling pressured in doing it. And those things
I'm hoping
are
that
really
will be the case. I got into playing in the Toronto Burby League, actually, and you probably know quite a few guys that are in the league. There's some amazing ball players in that league that played from intercounty to there's one guy that was drafted by the Jays, like, phenomenal pitching, and the best thing is you don't have to run the bases, right? You just stand out there in the outfield and catch fly balls, and if I want to try pitching, I can. And I can get ABs and some great looks against some really top-notch pitching. So I was into that for about 3 seasons. I'm taking a break now because I need to recover. But I'll get back into that. I'll get back into that for sure. And if the yips surface, I know that it happens.
Yeah, no,
and
I'll
talk it out or laugh about it. Right? I play darts a lot now. And I'm a pretty good dart player, but every so often the yips in darts, it's called dartitis. And it happens to the top dart players, right? And it's just something that I know is going to happen every once in a while. And when it happens, it's something that I got to joke about or talk about, or both, right? And so that strategy, there's no reason why that can't be applied to baseball as well.
Absolutely, especially when you have people that understand. Doug, I want to thank you for today, because this was probably our most courageous, self-aware podcast that we've done. It takes a big person to talk about things that are not necessarily, all about, hey, we got drunk at a bar in Montreal and skipped past curfew, right? These are some heavy things that we've discussed, but important things, and I think arm everybody with, instead of walking by in that dressing room, it's a little slap on the back and say, hey, man, we get it.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for putting this series together, and I look forward to listening to the remainder of the podcast.
Well, the smell